Hello and welcome to Hotseat, a collaboration between Sky News and First News, the UK's national newspaper for young people. Hotseat's already seen some of the country's most powerful men and women questioned by young people about the issues that matter to them. And we are very pleased that the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, is next in the seat. So here are the faces of who he now faces, the Hotseat panel. They've been drawn from First News readers and from Stand Up Be Counted Sky News campaign to get young people engaged in politics. So we have Tyler Margetson, Hassan Mian, Jadine Daniel, Noah Robertson, Jemima Ali and Emily Horbury. Before they get started, let's get Mr Clegg to introduce himself and explain to us why it is that he is so important to people's lives.
I am a leader of one of the political parties, the Lib Democrats, the Yellow Team, and I am also an MP, because in Sheffield, all MPs come from a particular part of the country. Sheffield Hallam is the name of my constituency. And I'm also the Deputy Prime Minister of this coalition government, which was formed back in 2010 because no single party had won the election, so we had to do something a bit new, which was create a government with two parties working together.
Great. Well, let's get started. And Tyler, you've got the first question.
You were the first party leader to take the hot seat. Why did you agree to do it?
Because you asked me, and because I thought it'd be rude to say no, and because I think it's great that you've got involved, and the more that... how old are you?
I'm 11.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that the fact that 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, like you, are interested in politics and want to ask questions and want to put people like me in the hot seat is just a great thing. Because even though you can't vote now, you will be able to vote in a few years' time, and the more people, you know, think seriously about politics and work out why it matters, the better.
Great. Next question from Hassan.
In the general election, if you could use your one vote to vote for David Cameron or Ed Miliband, who would you choose?
That's it. Oh dear, I'm going to give you my first politician's answer. I can't possibly answer that question. I'd always vote for my team. I'd always vote for the Liberal Democrat candidate. It's just too... it's a dilemma that I just hope I never have to face, to have to either vote for one or the other two parties.
You might have the dilemma, though, of deciding which one to go into coalition with after the election. Could you perhaps answer that one?
Well, it's not really my decision to take, of course. It's not that you're voting, but it's your mums and your dads and everybody else who's voting. It's their decision. It's the decision of the British people. So last time, millions and millions of British voters decided, by voting, that no party was attractive enough to them to get an absolute majority, to get a sort of slam-dunk result. But there was one party, the Conservative Party, that even though it didn't win the contest, was still a little bit closer to the finishing line. And I think it's right that in a democracy that should be the party that should try and assemble a government. Even if no one wins the contest, the one that's kind of still at the kind of, ahead of the others when the whistle goes, I think is the party that in a democracy should have the right to try and put together a government. And I think that's the same principle we should adopt in the next election if no one wins an outright majority.
Jadine, your question.
Before you became Deputy Prime Minister, you promised that you wouldn't raise the tuition fees. Do you think that makes people question whether politicians keep their promises?
I think the problem, and we've just talked about how in the last election no one won a majority, so what it means is that you get give and take. So no one can do everything they want because no one has won the right to do that. And I'm obviously not Prime Minister. If I was Prime Minister, I could do all the policies that my party wants. And so there had to be some give and take because the other, without going into all the detail, the other two parties wanted to see tuition fees go up, and so there was no way I could insist on our policy because I hadn't won the election. So we did the next best thing, and we, basically, in a nutshell, it's the fairest deal I could get in the circumstances, and I think it has actually proven to be much fairer than people, were worried about at the time. We've now got more young people going to university than ever before, and thankfully, more young people from poorer families going into university than ever before. But, for me to do everything I want, I would have to be Prime Minister. As I say, other parties have had to, I'm not sure if David Cameron's coming here. He said no ifs, no buts, promise about immigration, which he hasn't delivered. And the Labour Party said they were going to end the boom and bust of the up and down in the economy. And they messed up on that. So in politics, just as in life, sometimes you can't do. You're just not in the You're just not in the circumstances to do exactly what you want. And then I think you need to do the next best thing, which is be open with people, like I'm trying to be open with you, that you then try and do the fairest thing that you can.
So we've had lots of questions submitted by contributors to Stand Up Be Counted, Sky News' campaign to engage young people in politics. So here's one from Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon Cook and I'm from Sheffield. To be more specific, I'm from your constituency, Sheffield Hallam. And my question is, have you given up all hope of retaining your seat in this constituency? Because we haven't seen any evidence of a Lib Dem campaign so far.
Tough question.
Yes, I need to find out where Shannon lives. I find that very, very difficult to believe. I've been MP in Sheffield Hallam. It's the greatest privilege of my political life for 10 years, and I have helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people week in, week out. And we do a huge amount of campaigning. So anyway, I probably need to find out where Shannon lives. If maybe she lives in an address that has just sort of some reason sort of slipped off the register or something. But no, we do a great deal of campaigning. And if she hasn't heard from me, I'm pretty sure her neighbours have.
Confident that you're going to win? Or?
Yes, I am confident, but not complacent. I mean, elections are contests. They shouldn't be coronations. And though I'm confident that I will continue to be, because it's a great privilege to serve a community, and South West Sheffield is a wonderful community. Of course it should be a contest. Otherwise, what's the point of having an election?
Great. So let's go back to the panel. And Noah, I think you've got a question.
Yeah. You recently said if David Cameron wasn't up for facing Ed Miliband, you would do it for him. Are you still up for doing that?
Yes, I am. I think the Conservatives. I think they're just behaving a little bit sort of arrogantly, sort of saying, "Oh, we can't be bothered to turn up to debate. We're not going to lower ourselves to the level of everybody else." I mean, at the end of the day, well, we've just been talking about the contest in my constituency in Sheffield, but it's a wider contest, and at the end of the day, this is your country. It's the country which belongs to millions of people. It doesn't belong to politicians. Our democracy doesn't belong to politicians, and the debates don't belong to the Conservative Party, and they belong to the British people. And I think it helped last time to for people to see how the different party leaders discuss things, and then that allowed people to make up their own minds. And that's why I will participate in the debates. As it happens, I mean, without going into lots of detail, the way the debate's being organised is not ideal, frankly, from my point of view. And I worry a little bit that it's going to be a bit of a sort of laborious exercise with so many people on the stage at one time. But look, you either believe in open debate and sort of standing up for yourself, or you don't. And I just don't think it's right for the Conservative Party to grandly dismiss everybody else and say that they can't be bothered to turn up. Thanks. So Jemima, you've got a question now.
Do you think that it's fair that your Deputy Prime Minister, the second most important in the government, when your party got so few votes?
Well, my party in the last election, so that's what counts, the last election got 24% of the vote, so that's 1 in 4 people. So millions and millions and millions of people voted for the Liberal Democrats. So obviously, that's the mandate. That's the instructions you get from the people is when people vote in a general election. And the last time they voted in the general election, actually millions of people voted for us. We got the highest proportion of the votes than we've had for a very long time. I mean, the actual seats as well. Well, the problem with the seats, but this is the way the system works is a bit unfair. So even though we got 1 in 4 of people voting for us, we've actually only got 9% of the MPs in the House of Commons. So that's a system I would like to change, because I think we should have a system where the number of seats, the number of MPs that parties have, more broadly is a reflection of how voters have voted. We don't have that at the moment. But actually, in terms of the number of people who voted for us last time, it was a very big vote. Now, since then, I'm not sure if maybe you're referring to that. Since then, of course, opinion polls have been less flattering to the Liberal Democrats for all the obvious reasons, because we've had to do some pretty difficult and in some cases quite unpopular things to fix the economy. But you in a parliamentary democracy, you abide by the judgment that was last made for the election in which you were elected. And the last time we were elected, millions of people voted for us. Emily, what about your question?
I live in Watford, and I go to a very happy, high-achieving, multicultural comprehensive school. I've been a bit worried about the news lately, and I would like everyone to get along no matter what their beliefs are. How could you make this happen?
When you say worried about the news of sort of extremism and violence, no, I think that we live in quite uncertain times where particularly, but not exclusively, particularly through the internet, some people, and unfortunately, you know, a fairly sizable number of young people in our own country, in our own communities, can develop very kind of hateful and sometimes sort of violent kind of intentions because of what they read on the internet. And it's an ideology, it's a sort of set of ideas that sets people against each other and says that one religion is in a war against another and one country is in a war against another. And I agree with you. I think one of the things that makes our country so great, one of the things that clearly makes your school so great, is that even though lots of people come from lots of different places, different backgrounds, different religions, different, lots of differences, there are certain things we still believe in together. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in, non-violence. We believe in equality between men and women. We believe in democracy. We believe in human rights. And I do think it's important at a time when lots of kind of nasty people are trying to pull people apart, that we remind ourselves, not least in how we talk to each other in classrooms, but also how we talk to each other in the living room, in the kitchen, around the kitchen table, that there's a lot more, or at least there should be a lot more, that keeps us together.
So how do you believe that you could have prevented the 3 girls from joining ISIS?
It's very difficult to know what anyone could have done, given that I think I'm right in saying that their families are as distressed and surprised as anyone else that they appear to have left Syria. So if your own mum and dad, your brother and your sister, I think I heard the sister of one of the girls on the radio saying she had absolutely no idea that her sister might be inclined to do that. And so I think what is going on in the internet, what people are reading in their bedroom, on their tablets, on their laptops, is quite important. Now, clearly, as a government, we can't.
You seem to have been blocking some of what the Conservatives would like to do, though, when it comes to monitoring communications data and so on. I mean, is that not
slightly different? So that's something called what was dubbed the so-called Snoopers Charter, and that was a plan proposed by the Conservative Party, with whom I'm governing in government, where basically every single website you ever visit, any of you, and your mums and dads, in fact, everybody across the whole country, millions and millions of people, visiting billions, trillions of websites, that everybody's records of the websites that they visited or what they do on social media, that a record of that will be kept for a year. And I just think, why should the websites that you visit over a course of a whole year, and I hope most of you are doing entirely innocent things on the internet, why should that be stored by somebody? And that's an important principle of the values I was talking about earlier. We're a society that believes in the distinction between innocence and guilt. We don't make people feel guilty who are doing nothing wrong, and we have to defend that principle. And here's the difficult thing. I suppose we could make ourselves all much safer by saying everybody has to be, behind closed doors in their own home at 9 o'clock in the evening. Crime would disappear, almost disappear. But it's not the kind of society we want to live in, and that's the challenge. Because everyone's quite frightened and worried about what's going on, what we mustn't do is then sort of become a country that we don't actually, where we're all so fearful that we don't actually enjoy the freedoms that are under attack. Do you see what I mean? And that's the difficult balance. And it's a very, very, very difficult debate about how do you keep everybody safe, but keep everybody safe in a way that also makes everybody feel free.
Do you feel safe?
I think that I do, but I know there's probably a lot of communities out there who don't. And on my street, there's a lot of people who talk to each other. There's also a lot of people who just stay inside their homes and don't want to get involved with their community and their street. And it just feels frustrating how everyone just can't get along.
Yeah, no, it is very frustrating. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm really struck, I don't know whether you are, every time there's a big public event, the great celebrations around the royal family, a couple of years ago, the Olympics, the Tour de France, which went through a bit of my constituency in Sheffield, I've been really struck how any time people have an opportunity to actually come out of their homes and do something together, far more people come out to do that than anyone predicts, because I think you're dead right. Actually, we're all social. We all like talking to each other. We all like a friendly face and a warm welcome. People want to do things together, and the more that there are things you can do in your street, in your community, in your town, in your village, where people do stuff together, it makes people feel happier.
Yeah, I feel like there should be more opportunities.
Yeah, but there's a fair amount going on in Watford, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Great.
You've got a very good mayor in Watford.
So we've got 3 more questions now from Stand Up, Be Counted. So we can hear some of these now.
Hello, my name is Nancy and I'm from Bedford. My question to you is, how do you feel about the rapidly increasing number of youth that are committing crimes, and what do you think you can do to stop it?
The Liberal Democrat Constitution states that they reject discrimination based on gender. So I'd like to ask why there are so few female candidates to the party.
Hi, I'm Alicia and I'm from Huddersfield, and my question to the Deputy Prime Minister is, what are your views on lowering the voting age to 16?
There we go. 3 questions for you.
Yeah, so taking them some backwards maybe. Lowering the voting age, yes, I do think there's so many things you can do, or you will be able to do, in effect as adults when you're 17. Why can't you vote? I mean, I think you'll be able to serve, perhaps not quite on the front line, but you'll be able to serve in the armed forces. So if you can serve in the armed forces and politicians can send you sort of to war, why can you not vote for those politicians? So I do think, and the Scottish referendum recently, they had 16, they had votes at 16, and I think it was a great thing. Lots of young people got involved. So I do think we need to lower the voting age. I've always thought that's the good thing is the Labour Party now agrees. The Conservatives are still saying no, but I think we'll win the argument eventually, because I just think it's a bit patronising to say that a 17-year-old can't decide what the future of our country. There aren't enough women in Parliament as a whole. There aren't enough women in the Liberal Democrats. But, you know, just generally Parliament is not diverse enough. My party, the MPs of the Liberal Democrats, are sort of too male and pale. And if we want to represent modern Britain, then modern Britain should be represented in us. There's lots of things we're doing to try and change that. So, for instance, in the, I think, 11 seats, constituencies where Liberal Democrat MPs have decided to retire, the majority of those who are trying to succeed them, to follow them up, are people from underrepresented groups, women, individuals from black minority ethnic backgrounds and so on. There is it's quite a sort of arcane thing, but it's quite a heated debate amongst politicians, is if you want to have more women in Parliament, should you have kind of quotas for women in the political parties and say, you know, if you want to be a candidate in this part of the country, you can only be a candidate if you are a woman. And that divides opinion. Some people say, no, we shouldn't, you know, that sounds like a sort of tokenistic thing. I must say, my own personal view is that if my party doesn't become more diverse in the way in which we are in Parliament, then I'd be looking at doing something like that after the next election. And the first question was...
what's the first question? Remind me. It was on crime.
It's crime. Yes. Oh, look, I think on crime, I think the thing that we need to do with crime, so many things we need to do with crime, but the main thing we need to do with crime is remember that if you chuck someone in prison, just, you know, for a few weeks and sort of throw the key away, and just sort of leave someone to languish in prison for a few weeks, what tends to happen is that far from sorting the crime, you actually end up seeing more crime happen later, because what happens is someone goes in as a sort of young offender, can I put it like that, and they come out as a hardened criminal because they've spent time with other hardened criminals, they commit more crime and they go back in. It's that revolving door of crime, into prison, out of prison, committing crime, back into prison, out of prison, committing more crime. That's what we need to stop, and that's often, it's almost more important what you do both in prison, education and helping people to get back on the straight and narrow when they leave prison, but it's also making sure that people have got jobs, places to live in once they've left prison. And thankfully, that's now starting. So as prisoners now leave, literally the prison gates, they're going to be met, because of decisions this government's taken, they're going to be met by someone whose responsibility it is to help that prisoner or ex-prisoner to stay on the straight and narrow and not commit another crime.
Great. So let's go back to the panel. Tyler, what's your next question?
What sort of dad are you, and do you see enough for your children?
Well, I'm a completely besotted dad. I have 3 adorable little children, 3 boys, 13, 10 and 6. And they mean absolutely everything to me. I mean, they are so much more important to me than anything I do in the office or in politics. And I try and keep them completely, and Miriam and I try and keep them completely out of the sort of public eye, so hopefully you won't see any photographs or anything. And we still live in the home that we lived in before I became Deputy Prime Minister, and they go to local schools, and they're all football crazy, and the 2 oldest ones are Arsenal fanatics, and I spend as much time as I can. My wife, Miriam, so I don't know whether your mum and dad both work, but my wife Miriam also works, so we have to juggle things. So we're constantly saying who's going to be putting them to bed tonight and who's going to be getting them ready to school on that day. And so I try and see them. I'm their dad, and I try and be sort of with them and every step of the way as much as I possibly can.
Hassan, what's your next question?
If you were on a desert island, which MP would you choose to take with you and why?
What a superb question. What a superb question. Well, if I can just sort of exclude... I'll exclude sort of friends of mine, because I've got some fellow Liberal Democrats, like Danny Alexander and David Laws, who are sort of old friends of mine. But I think I'd probably pick, if it wasn't fair, I'd pick a man called Ken Clarke, who's not from my party. He's from the Conservatives. He's a lot older than I am, but he's wonderful company. He has so many stories, and I could listen to his stories for a considerable amount of time, and I suspect we'd have a considerable amount of time on a desert island.
Is that someone you could potentially work with as a leader of the Conservative Party?
Him as a leader. I don't think he's even pretending he's going to be a leader. But no, he used to sit next to me in a table in Downing Street, where you have the meetings every week of the cabinet. And obviously he and I don't agree on everything because he's from a different party. But I think he's a very good-natured bloke and talks a lot of sense.
Great, Jadine, you're next.
What do you think of Nigel Farage?
As a person, or well, his views. I obviously don't agree with his views. He seems. I mean, as a person, to be honest, as a person, I never try and be too kind of personal about other politicians, because I always think you can respect someone as an individual. Slightly comes right back to your point, even if you disagree with their views. And what little I know of him as a person, he seems a fairly sort of kind of colourful character, so I've got nothing against him personally. I just think his views I just think it'd be disastrous for the country, for us as a country, and for you and for your generation, if we did what he wants. He wants us to basically kind of turn our back on the outside world and pull out of the EU and kind of sort of say, the rest of the world can go away. And you just, in this day and age where people move from one country to another, and the jobs that hopefully you will be taking up when you're older will no doubt, or some of them will no doubt be jobs because people from other parts of the world have invested in offices and factories in this country. You can't cut yourself off from the rest of the world. You've got to be an open and generous-hearted country, and I think his vision is a bit sort of mean-spirited and sort of, lock the door and, go to the cliffs of Dover and put a poster up and say everybody else go home. I just it's not the kind of country I want my children to grow up in. So you were ruling out being in a coalition with UKIP? I'd never. I mean, in the same way, people ask me this about. There's a Scottish party called the SNP. You may have heard of, and I always say, look, in the same way that I'd never put UKIP and Nigel Farage in charge of Europe because he wants to pull it apart, I wouldn't put the SNP in charge of our country because they want to pull it apart as well. So it's just not going to happen. Noah, you're next.
You've been in the news lately saying that drugs should be decriminalised. Don't you think this gives a bad impression to young people and might encourage them to take them?
No, I don't. I think the reverse, and let me try and explain. So first thing is, drugs are really, really bad. They are harmful. There's nothing good about taking drugs which harm your health. So the question is not, are they harmful? Of course they are. Of course they are. Some are more harmful than others, but, it's how do you reduce the harm? And I think locking people up behind bars, we talked earlier about prison, who need treatment. They need treatment. They need help to get off the drugs, and letting the criminals who sold them the drugs in the first place and are getting very rich to kind of walk scot-free it should be exactly the way around. We should be putting the criminals behind bars and giving the people who've got maybe they made terrible mistakes in their lives and the rest of it, and are harming their health. They need treatment, and that's all I'm saying. And of course, if you do the other way around, if you lock up the people who need treatment and let the people who need to be locked up to go, to walk free, all you're going to do is just allow the criminals to get richer and the drug addicts to not get better and not to get the treatment they need. So that's why I think you need a different approach. And what frustrates me on this is that it's a very good example of people talking terribly tough, war on drugs and all the rest of it. And, and then everyone goes, oh, absolutely. But the evidence shows that the war on drugs isn't working. You've got more and more people, in fact, more and more younger people getting sort of hooked onto drugs. You've got the criminal bosses getting richer and richer and richer. And I just have this old-fashioned view that if something isn't working, do something different, which might be better.
OK, Jemima, it's your question next.
The Welsh Assembly decided not to ban smacking last week. Do you smack your children, and do you think it should be against the law?
I don't smack my children, but having said that, it's of course, by the way, there are laws to stop anyone, parents or anyone else, being violent to a child. Of course, we need to protect you, we need to protect everyone from, being hurt and people, being violent towards each other. The difficulty, I think, is if you try and write a law being really specific. I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you, but I bet you, I don't know, when you were younger, you're all so grown up and responsible now, but I bet you when you were younger, when you weren't angels all the time, were you? Yeah, you behaved badly. Maybe, I don't know, your mum or your dad sort of grabbed you by the arm when you were sort of playing up in a supermarket, or pulled you when you were, I don't know, even pulled you when you were going to be in quickly so you wouldn't get into danger of crossing the street. I don't know. I'm just trying to... The idea that parents don't touch their children and sometimes, touch them a little bit kind of, a bit, with a bit of frustration or even anger. You can't, I think it's quite difficult to write a law and say, mums and dads, you can do this, but you can't do that. And that's why I don't quite see how the law would work. And on the whole, I just would like mums and dads to be responsible and good to their children, and not think that it's always got to be kind of Parliament telling parents how to be mums and dads. That should, at the end of the day, Parliament can't or shouldn't try and fix everything in the family home.
Emily, your question now.
Is there a lot of stress being in the government? If so, how do you relax in your spare time?
I suppose that I think there's a lot of stress in lots of jobs, and at the end of the day, it's a massive, it's a massive privilege for me to do what I'm doing. So no, I'm sure there are lots of other jobs which are just as, if not much more stressful. What do I? Well, I love sports. I love watching and playing sports. Play a lot of football with my children. I love reading. I always read a book, particularly late at night. And do you know what? I suppose I'm very lucky in the sense that I've got lots of friends and family who they don't regard me as Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm just Nick to them, and so I spend time with them, and they couldn't really care what I do between 9 and 5, and so I like to think that I keep my feet, or at least they keep my feet fairly planted on the ground, and that sort of helps me deal with all these sort of ups and downs and stresses and strains of the job.
Right, we're going to have a quick fire round of questions now.
Oh, so dear. These are the ones which always go horribly wrong.
If you try and keep your answers as short as you can,
I will.
That would be great. Tyler.
What is your biggest regret in politics?
My biggest regret? Not being Prime Minister.
Hassan?
What would you like to be remembered for?
For putting the country pulling the country back from the brink. I think we were in a really, really dangerous place 5 years ago, and we're now not.
JD.
How do you feel about being in a coalition government with a party that has completely different ideas to yours?
It's as you imagine. You work with people who you don't agree with, but you try and work together because that's what's best for the country. And I suspect, how can I put this? I'm sure you've got people in your class who you sit next to, you don't particularly agree with, but you can still just rub along.
Noah, what's your question?
You told our editor you'd be rubbish at maths questions but are good at spelling. So how do you spell accommodation?
ACCOMMODATION.
Yeah.
Relief. What's the next question?
Can you give us an exclusive story?
Excuse me. The last film I saw was Big Hero 6, and it was brilliant. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Isn't it great?
You liked it?
Is that exclusive enough? Yeah, come on. Yeah.
That would just about pass. Yeah. Emily, what's your question?
The cost of transport, housing and living are rising above wages. What could you do to make sure that living in the UK is more affordable?
Main thing is to make sure that people, particularly those who kind of really, for whom it's difficult to pay for the rent, pay for the bus, passes and all the rest of it, have got more money in their pockets, so that the government takes less away from them in tax. That's the biggest thing. So, for instance, one of the things I'm proudest of is that because of something I championed and my party championed for years, over 3 million, can you believe it, over 3 million people who aren't paid very much don't pay any income tax at all because we've taken them out of paying tax. There's a good example.
Well, that's it for another Hot Seat. Our thanks to our panel and to our Stand Up Be Counted contributors who sent in a video question. And, of course, thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, as well.
Thank you. Thank you.